Today's daf going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Chav Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by the Greenstone Cousins in honor of Lana Kirzner's birthday. With love toward your cousin Lana. Lana, your commitment is to learning is a profound tribute to the legacy of our parents, a testament to the values they instilled in us. May the merit of this learning bring you peace, joy, and health this year and every year, not only for yourself, but as a blessing to all those around you. Today's daf is sponsored by Gabrielle and Daniel Altman in loving memory of Lisa Altman, Zichrona Levarcha, on her 20th year at site. We miss her love, warmth, kindness, wisdom, and spirit. Her memory and legacy will remain with us always. Okay, we're going to get started. Started with the bottom of Kuf Chavav Amud Bet. We finished before the section of the tumtum. So we're going to start right now with the tumtum. A tumtum is someone, if you remember, there's tumtum, there's androgynous. Androgynous has both male and female genitals. The tumtum has only one, but it's covered. And we don't know when a tumtum is born whether they're male or female. So we're going to learn 5 different laws relating to a tumtum. The first one, and they're each stated by a different person, and we're learning specifically about a tumtum, as they call it, shinikra v'nimtza, that their skin becomes perforated, and it turns out they are male. So when they're born, we didn't know, but we'll see in some of the situations. Immediately, very soon after, it was torn, and we realized they were zachar. But the issue is going to be that they weren't born as a known zachar. They weren't known to be male at the moment they were born, and we're going to have all sorts of halakhot that, based on the psukim, we're going to say it really is determined by a male that is known to be a male from the moment of birth. And that's why this kind of tumtum is not going to be considered a male for these purposes. And the first one is going to be the purposes of a bechor, firstborn. Because remember, if it's a firstborn female, there's no law of bechor, right? They have to be a firstborn male. So Amar Rabbi Ami, tumtum shenikra v'nimtza zachar eino notel pi shnayim. You don't get the double portion, even though you happen to be the firstborn male. But because you weren't born as a clear, we didn't know at the moment of birth that you were male, you do not get the pishnayim. Damar Kras, the pasuk says, now where do they get this from the pasuk? Well, it says, Haya haben habachor lasniya, right? In the case where the firstborn is the son of, again, this is where all the halakhot come out of. If the man had 2 wives and the firstborn is of the wife that he doesn't like as much as the other one, again, it's hard to call it the hated wife, whatever that means. Ad shiehei ben mishat havaya, because it says vehaya. Now, haya often means a language of marriage. Here, it obviously doesn't mean marriage because it's talking about the son who was born. So havaya means creation, right? From the formation of this child, meaning from the moment the child was born. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, here's a different halacha. I just want you to remember that Rav Ami said this first halacha because after we say all 5, and then we're going to deal with the difficulty. The structure for the first section is 5 halachot relating to this tumtum shenikra v'nimtza zachar. Then we're going to move to a braita that seems to contradict the last one, and then even possibly contradicts the 4th one, and we're going to basically deal with that as an aside. Then we're going to get back, and someone's going to bring a braita that supports Rabbi Ami, which is our halacha. And from there, we're going to get off on the second part of that braita. So that describes the structure for the first part of today's daf. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Af eino nidon ki ben sorer u'moreh. He also can't become a ben sorer or moreh, right? There's all these halakhot for a son who doesn't listen to his parents and eats a lot and drinks a lot and all sorts of things. And they even get the death penalty. A tumtum shenikra v'nimtza zachar cannot become a ben sorer or moreh. Why is that? Tamar krat ki leish ben sorer or moreh. When a person has yeh again, a ben, a child, a male child who is a sorer or moreh, who goes a wayward child, ad sheyeh ben mishat havaya. Again, the same drasha. Haya means birth. He had to be a ben, a male, at the time of birth. We didn't know he was, but we didn't know, so that he's excluded from that halacha. Back to Bechor, Ameimar Amal, and this is a little bit of a complicated mathematical calculation, but I'll try to explain it simply. If he was, let's say, a younger child in the family, now if you remember, how do we divide the Bechor? Let's say there's 3 brothers. What do? We split the entire property into 4, even though there's only 3 brothers. We split it into 4, and the Pishnayim is 2 portions of those 4. The Bechor will get half, and the other brothers will each get a quarter. And that's how it works. Well, let's say the third brother, it could be second or the third, it doesn't matter, fourth or fifth or sixth, doesn't make a difference, is a tumtum shenikavanim tzazacha. Now, if there were three brothers and there was a sister, the sister wouldn't come into the calculation at all, right? Likewise, if we have this tumtum who's not counted, he does get the regular, he doesn't get the pishnayim, but he does get the regular portion. So what does this mean? He's eno mema'et chelik bechora. He doesn't lessen the portion of the bechor. What does that mean? It means that in the case where we have a tumtum shenkavin in tzazachal, where skin was perforated, it turns out he's a zachar, we're going to count him only one calculation and not the other. So what are we going to do? If there's, let's say, three brothers and one is a tumtum, when the bechor, who's not the tumtum, gets the pishnayim, we ignore the tumtum. And we say, okay, let's take all the property. And instead of dividing it into four to give the pishnayim as half, we're going to divide it into three as if there's only two brothers. We're not going to count him in the calculation for the pishnayim. So we're going to split it. And what's going to happen? The bechor is going to get a third for their pishnayim. Their double portion is going to be a third, but not the regular portion. Because when it comes to the regular portion, we're going to count him in because it's only a din for bechor he's not included. And not only is he not included to be a bechor, but even to limit the portion of the bechor. And we'll see in a minute where they get this from. Then we're left with 2/3. The 2/3 is divided equally between the three brothers now, and the tumtum is included. So we don't count him in the count for the pishnayim. He doesn't lessen the portion of pishnayim. He's treated as if he wasn't a boy for that, but he is counted as a boy as a male for the purposes of the rest of the property. So how do we get this? Shene'emal, it says in that pasuk again, when a person has two wives, right? And Yaldulo Banim, he has sons from Ahava and Snua, from both wives. What does it say? Yaldalo Banim, meaning she birthed for him children, which means it has to be a male child at the time of birth. Right? So Ad Sheheh Ben Bishat Leidah. He would have to be male from the moment he was born, and therefore this wasn't. So, right, and that's the whole law of the pishnayim. So for the law of pishnayim, since it says, and he has brothers who were born as brothers, right, that comes to exclude ones who weren't born as definitive brothers. Fourth halacha, Rav Shizbi Amal. Af enoni mo lishmona. He doesn't have a brit milah on the 8th day. Now this is weird. Why wouldn't he have a brit milah on the 8th day? Of course he has a brit milah on the 8th day. That's not what it means. What it means is there's a special halacha, I'm sure you know this, that if a child is born on the 8th, if a child is born in a way that his 8th day falls on Shabbat, normally you wouldn't do a brit milah on Shabbat, but you do if it's the 8th day, meaning brit milah is a halakha that overrides Shabbat. So now what do we say? Well, he's not nimo lishmona if it comes out on Shabbat. Okay, he doesn't get his brit milah on the 8th day. Why is that? Right. Obviously, here we're talking about a situation where by the time we got to day 8, skin perforated, and we knew he was a zachar. Damar kra, it says in the pasuk, Isha, and this is going to be the basis for the next halacha as well. Isha ki tazriya v'yalda zachar. Okay, if a woman has seed and gives birth to a male child, however we define this word tazriya, but okay, we'll leave that aside right now. But she gives birth to a male child. There's this connection between, and this whole section there really talks about all the blood and the tuma, the laws of impurity. But it also mentions in that context the 8th day and the brit milah. So we say here, well, she has to be yalda zachar in order for this pasuk to kick in. Bayom hashmini means even if it's Shabbat, right? That's how they darshan it. But that drasha is only relevant to someone who was yalda zachar. And again, if we didn't know that she gave birth to a male child, because at the time it wasn't known, right? He had to be a known male child from the moment of birth. Rav Shrev Yamar. Af ein imot me'al leida. Oh, well, what did I just tell you? These psukim talk about tum'at leida. Now, let's get some background about tum'at leida. It's important to understand for the continuation. If a woman gives birth to a male child, she's impure for 7 days. Any blood she sees after that, from day 8 to day 40, okay, it's 33 days altogether, are considered dam tohar. What does that mean, dam tohar? It means pure blood. It means if she still has bleeding, that blood does not forbid her to be with her husband. It actually does forbid her from coming to the temple to sacrifice. But for the most part, it's not impure blood. If she gives birth to a female, it's double. 14 days of dam tuma and 66 days of dam tohar. So for the next 66 days after that, so up to day 80 as opposed to up to day 40 for the male, up to day 80 again for 66 days, she's not going to be, right? Any blood she sees, she'll actually be pure. In other words, it won't forbid her from being with her husband. Now, comes Rosh Shvevia and says, Af ein imot me'al leida. All the laws of Tumat Leida that I just described to you, and in this case, it would be the male ones, the 7 days and then the 33, are not relevant. Okay, what does that mean then? If she bleeds, we'll treat her, I guess, like a Nidda, right? She'll have to sit 7 days, but that's it. Okay, she doesn't, right? And now, what does it mean that's it? Actually, if she continues to bleed, it's actually not that's it. She continues to bleed, it's problematic, it's impure blood. We have none of this dam tohar laws. Okay, it's just not relevant to her. Damar Kra, why is that? Because again, same pasuk. Right? Another thing it says there is that when she gives birth to a male, she's tme'ah for 7 days. So this is irrelevant for this woman because she's not yalda zachar or not yalda nekeva. So if it's not clear the child was female or not clear the child was male, it would be the same if they find out she was female. Okay, it doesn't make a difference. Right? No tumat leida. All the rules of tumat leida don't apply. So ad she is zachar mishat leida. She would have, right? The child would either have to be male or have to be female at the time of the birth. Meitive. Now they bring a difficulty, as I told you. So we now had those 5 laws, each given by a different rabbi. We're now going to bring a different contradiction on the last law, and then we're going to say perhaps it's even a contradiction on the previous one. Okay, Rav Shvevia and then Rav Shizbi, who said the last 2 statements. Meitive. Here we have a difficulty. Now, a woman who miscarries also, okay, if it's past a certain time in the pregnancy, she also has to deal with this tumat leidan, since she usually doesn't, right? There's no way that they don't, certainly then they had no idea if it was male or female. So you would have to consider yourself as if the birth was, right? The miscarriage is considered like a birth, as if the birth was either male or female, and you have to be strict on both ways. Now, what does it mean to be strict in both directions? This is why I explained all the dam Torah and dam tameh. Any blood from day 1 to 14, we're going to say is tameh, because that's the chumrah, as if it was a girl. And the chumrah, as if it was a boy, is to say only until day 40, though. You're now going to end up with much, right? From day 14 till day 40, it's not 33 anymore, it's only 26. For those 26 days, blood she sees will be dam tohar. But beyond that, no. So we have a chumrah of both. So if she's mapelet tumtum androgynous, and what if the hapala was an unknown, right? Either both or neither. Teshev la zachar v'la nekeva. Now, this isn't a case where with nikravanim zachar. This we just have no idea what the tumtum was because the tumtum didn't make it. Well, teshev la zachar v'la nekeva. She needs to be concerned for both directions. Now, this is strange because Rav Shvevia said by a tumtum, even if it's nikravanim zachar, there wouldn't be tumat leida, because you would need someone who was going to be born in a definitive way, and this baby wouldn't have been born in a definitive way. So you would have to be teshev la zachar v'la nekeva. You'd have to be for both. Okay, so now we say tiyuvta to Rav Shvevia, tiyuvta. This in fact raises a difficulty with Rav Shvevia because it does sound like if the tumtum had been born, right? If the tumtum was miscarried, right? Or I guess we're talking more like a stillborn here, then you would have to be teshev both for the zachar and the nekeva. Doesn't make any sense because if it was actually born and we found that it was zachar, you wouldn't need to do that. So why would you do it now? Okay, based on again, only if it was a definitive zachar, and this wasn't. So now they say not only does it raise a question with that, but it would even raise a question before, okay, which is for the opinion that's also based on that verse about the brit milah. Wouldn't you say this is also a difficulty for Rav Shizbi? Because this seems to imply that those rules for those psukim, which include the brit milah, apply even to someone who it's not clear what their status is. So wouldn't you say the same for a brit milah then? I say no, that's not true. Because Tana sipuke mesapkele ulechumra. The Tana of this braita was unsure and therefore said, we're going to be strict. In other words, maybe they apply, maybe they don't apply. Well, if you do the same thing for the brit milah case and you're not sure, well, then you won't say, oh, this overrides Shabbat. You have to be sure for it to override Shabbat. Okay, I kind of said that obviously, we do a brit milah on Shabbat because we do brit milah on Shabbat, but maybe you've never seen a brit milah on Shabbat because there's often situations where it's a case of doubt. Like if the baby's born on Friday night where it's unclear whether it was Friday or whether it was Shabbat, then it's not going to override Shabbat because we're not sure. Any case of uncertainty, basically, we're unsure about it, and therefore we're going to go l'chumrah. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. If the whole braita we're now saying is just we don't know whether yalda zachar, whether it has to be definitive or not definitive, and therefore let's be strict, well, then the halacha wouldn't be teshev la zachar u'nekeva. If you want to be strict and worry on all fronts, then what should it be? There's three possibilities, right? Either it was male, or it was female, or it wasn't, or these laws don't apply when we're unclear. If the laws don't apply when we're unclear, then what do we say? It's Nidda, right? Any blood is Nidda, and we're not going to have the kulas, the leniencies of the demei leida, right? We're meaning day 15 to day 40 will all be okay blood. You won't become impure. But what do you mean? If we're not sure if these laws apply at all, then you should be impure in those days. And it should have said, Teshev lazachar v'lanekeva v'lenida mibayale. That's what it should have said. To which the Gemara says, yeah, in fact, that is kasha. Okay? Then we don't really have, and as what we did here was, let me just go back to the structure. We had 5 halakhot, starting with the bechor, about the tumtum shenikavan in tzasachal, 5 different halakhot regarding this person. Then we brought a difficulty on the last one. We said it's actually difficult. This braita doesn't work with Rosh Hashanah, yeah? Then we said perhaps it raises a difficulty with Rosh Shizbi. We said, oh no, not really. And then we said maybe it does, because if we really had a good resolution, then the braita should have said, well, if it was just a suffix and they're not sure, which then would have worked okay with the brit milah, because that's also a suffix, and each time we just go a different direction on the suffix case. We're not going to let it override Shabbat, but we will be strict about impurity. But the strict about impurity should have included also the possibility that she's a Nidda, in which case, right, she would basically, what would she do? 14 days would be Tamei Tuma like a female, and any other days would be Tamei like a Nidda. By the way, you wouldn't need Zachar in there. Some of the commentaries point that out then. There is no Chumrah for a Zachar, according to that. But let's just, they just got stuck in there because of the Zachar Nekeva and all that. But anyway, we're left with really, perhaps that braita really is difficult to Rav Shizbi as well. Now, as I told you from the beginning, pay attention. The first one was said by Rabbi Ami, because right now I'm a Rava Tanya Kavatei to Rabbi Ami. And here you have it explicitly. The pasuk talked about the ben habachor was lasniah, right? If the situation is where the man had 2 wives, and the one he didn't like as much had the one who the son was born to her. So why does it say haben habachor? Each one worded there, ben and bachor, is going to be used to darshan something. Ben velo tumtum. Okay, from there you learn a ben and not a tumtum, and even a tumtum shenikavenim sasachal. So there you have our halacha. So that's why this braita supports Rabbi Ami. Now the Gemara is going to ask, the braita is going to have a second drasha, and then the Gemara is going to ask, what does this drasha mean? Bechor velo safek. Okay, so the second word there, ben habechor. So ben means has to be a male and not a tumtum who wasn't clear what their status was. And obviously we mean who eventually we find out it's male. Otherwise, of course, the tumtum wouldn't get the pishnayim, because we don't even know if the bechor, right, if the tumtum is male. And that was Rabbi Ami. The second halacha is only the bechor gets pishnayim, not a suffix, not a case where we're not sure if he's a bechor. Now that's totally unnecessary drasha, because you've been learning for a long time, especially in the Bavas. We've talked many times about hamotzi mechaber alav haraya. You want to get money out of someone, the burden of proof is on you. So if the bechor, who's maybe a bechor, maybe not a bechor, the pasuk is telling you, well, he has to be a definitive bechor. If he's not a definitive bechor, he can't lay claim to the pishnayim. That's very obvious. Of course he can't. The brothers could say, go prove you're the bechor, and he can't because he's a suffix. So of course he wouldn't get the pishnayim. So the Gemara says, Bishlama ben velo tumtum kid Rabbi Ami. We get the chiddush of the tumtum, even though it just says tumtum. Obviously, it means what Rabbi Ami said, which is a tumtum b'nikravanim sasachar. Otherwise, it's also unnecessary. Tumtum, who we don't know, male or female, of course they're not going to get the bechor, so it must be like Rabbi Ami. What's this bechor velo safek coming to exclude? So now the Gemara is going to say, and again, I'm going to tell you the structure ahead of time. Some of the The structures are a little confusing today, so if you understand the structure before, maybe it'll help you. We're now going to say that this braita, this drasha, bechor velo safek, is coming to go against something that Rava says. Okay, Rava obviously says it later than the braita, but the point is, if somebody thought it in the time of the braita, right, the braita is saying that is not the case. What Rava says, he's wrong, okay, or according to the braita, according to the author of the braita doesn't accept Rava's position. In the end, we're going to see that Rava in the end changes his mind about his own position anyway, but that still is the answer. The answer is it's coming to exclude this particular case. Don't think what Rava is going to say is right. Okay? And then Rav Pappa is going to raise a question against Rava, and Rava is going to change his mind. In a very bold manner, we're going to see how sometimes rabbis have a lot of, they get up and they say, oh, I made a mistake. Okay, we wish that would happen more often, but here we're going to see Rava showing a good example of how to do that. So let's first learn Rava and see what this braita was coming to exclude. Derives Rava. Okay, it's to exclude what Rava said. Derives Rava. Again, remember, the braita comes way before Rava. Rava's fourth generation Emora, braita from the time of the Tanaim. But the point is, right, if someone were to say this, the braita is saying it's not the case. Two women gave birth to two boys. Now, these two women were married to the same man. And they gave birth in a cave in a dark place. No one knew who was born first. So when they get out into the sunlight and they see the two children, they have no idea which was the one that was born first. Okay, they didn't see which was born first, or they didn't see which was which, or right. There's a lot of confusion here. They don't know who the bechor is. So now, what's the situation? Later on, these wives have more children, or this man has more children with other wives. Doesn't make a difference, but there's other brothers, and they want to get the pishnayim. Now, one of them is definitely the bechor. We just don't know which one. So Rava explains there's a solution to that. They write an authorization. If I'm the bechor, I'm giving you my rights. And the other one says, if I'm the bechor, I'm giving you my rights. And then one of them can go to the brothers with a definitive claim, because if it's not me, my brother gave me rights to his bechor. And then you can demand the money, the pishnayim, and then they'll divide the extra portion between the two of them, right? They make an arrangement. Very smart. So Amalei Rav Pappa, and yeah, what's the point? The point, what we said before, is that when it says bechor velo safek, if you're not a definitive bechor, you can't do this. You can't claim it as, well, if it's not me, it's my brother, and I'm claiming it on behalf of both of us, because this is a case of a doubt. You can't do that. Rava thinks you can, but the braita is saying, no, this doesn't work. But now, as I told you before, I'm a Rav Pappa Rava. Well, how could you possibly say this? Hashalach Ravin sent the following thing. Now, Ravin was one of those people who brought the Torah of Israel to Babylonia. He sent us the following thing. I asked all the rabbis about this, what we do in this situation, and nobody answered me. But in the end, I heard that people quoted in the name of Rabbi Yanai that there's a distinction between two cases. If at some point we knew who the bechor is, but then we lost track, okay, we got confused, we weren't sure which one was first. Let's say they were born in the same room with light. We saw one of them, this one's the one born first. And then a few minutes later, the babies get confused. We don't know who's who, right? Reminds us of the Shlomo Melech story. Then you can do it because there was a definitive bechor. We just don't know who the bechor is. But lohu kru, and it's, I mean, either which way there was a definitive bechor, but we knew at some point and now we don't. Lohu kru, but if we never knew, like this case in the dark, ein kotvin harsha zelazet. So there you see, Rabbi Yana said, no, we don't do this. So Hadar okay Amora, here comes the big moment. Rava brings in Amora, which was like his megaphone or microphone, okay? It was his way of, he would speak and then someone else would say his words to the masses. Vidarash, and he said the following thing, and here comes his big, strong words. Dvarim sha'amarti lachem ta'ut hem biyadi. What I told you before was a mistake. I made a mistake, biyadi, right? And even like some people try to cover up, oh, we made a mistake, oh, this, right? No, I made a mistake. Biram kachamu mishum Rabbi Yanai, and now he quotes it. This is what they said in the name of Rabbi Yanai, who kru levasof nitarvu kotvim rashal zelazet, lo kru ein kotvim rashal zelazet, exactly as we said. If we knew the bechor was the first, then they can do this authorization type solution. But if not, we can't. So now, okay, this again, how did we do it? We had the 5 things, we had difficulty, we resolved, right? We didn't really resolve the difficulties on the last 2 opinions. Then we went back to the first one and said we have a braita to support it. The second part of that braita got into this bechor velo safek, and for that we had to explain what on earth it was talking about. And the whole point is it was saying, we don't agree with this harsha'ah thing, kind of like the braita went with Rabbi Yanai. Again, Rabbi Yanai was after, so Rabbi Yanai went with the braita, and Rava thought otherwise, but he himself changed his mind. Now in a similar, we're going to move on to something a little different, but the reason we get here is because of the harsha'ah. We're going to get back to the law of yakir, which is the father is believed to say which son is the bechor, and we're going to talk about that halacha now. As I told you, Din Daf this week will be on this topic. It should be up hopefully tomorrow. Okay. Shalchule b'nei Akra da'agma l'Shmuel. The people in Akra da'agma said to Shmuel, Yilamdenu Rabbeinu, please tell us the halacha about the following situation. Hayu muchzakim bashu b'chor. Everyone knew that this was the firstborn in the family. Okay, you can imagine, right? Lots of families. People just knew this was the bechor. But then, okay, this is what we call a chazaka. There was a chazaka in this family, right? This kid was the bechor. Va'amar aviv alakhir bechorhu. And then the father comes along and says, no. This son is the bechor. Mahu. What do you do then? Does that work? So now we have chazaka, that one son's the firstborn. The father's saying the other son's the firstborn. What do we do? Shalach lehu. So Shmuel sent back, kotvin harsha'ah zelazeh. And that's why we got here, because just like in the other case we suggested, which in the end we said you don't do, in this case, we don't know which one, but we know that one of them for sure is, because it's either that or that. Again, there's other brothers, so the firstborn portion can go to the Pishnayim, can go to both of them together. They split it 50-50 because it's not, again, Hamatzim Mechaber Alav Haraya is when there's no proof that there's even a bechor. But, and which one is the bechor? We have no idea which one. But in this case, we know it's either one or two and not, definitely not three or four. So each one can authorize the other to accept it on their behalf. One of them takes it and splits it 50-50. To which the Gemara says to Shmuel, we don't understand your opinion. Manavshach. Now we're going to learn, and they'll only come up with this in a few minutes. We're going to see it in a minute or two, but we're going to learn that there's a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis specifically about this case. When there's no chazaka, we believe the father to say the son is the bechor. But when there's a chazaka saying Reuven is the bechor, and the father comes along and says Shimon is the bechor, we have a machloket whether we believe the father or not, or we just ignore the father. So the Gemara says to Shmuel, I don't understand why you came up with this solution of a harsha'ah. Manavshach. In other words, you either hold like the rabbis or you hold like Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, you should have an answer and not, right? So, manavshach. Ika Rabbanan sfirale, lishlachlu Rabbanan. If you hold like the rabbis, you should do like the rabbis. Who's going to say, we don't believe the father and Reuven's going to get everything. And Ika Rabbi Yehuda sfirale, lishlachlu Rabbi Yehuda. If you hold like Rabbi Yehuda, who says, we do believe the father, then Shimon should get it all. So I don't understand your in-between answer. Either you hold this way or you hold this way. So the obvious answer is going to be, he wasn't sure who to hold like. Okay, he wasn't clear who we should hold like. And therefore, he said, let's do this harsha'ah solution. Now the Gemara wants to understand the Rabbi Yehuda, rabbi's debate. So we're going to go into it. What's this debate that the Gemara kind of mentioned as if we assume you know what it is, but the Gemara knows you might not, so they're going to bring the braita where they disagree. Ditanya, yakirenu la'achirim. Okay, so again, the pasuk uses this weird language. It says, "Et bechor ben hasnua yakir latet lo pishnayim." You have to recognize. It's kind of saying you have to recognize that the son of the one you dislike or don't like as much as the other one is the bechor. But why yakir? You could just say, Et habachor ben asnua yitain lo pishnayim. Why does it say yakir latelo? You recognize to give. Why don't you just say you have to give? What's this yakir? So the drasha is yikirenu lachirim. It means that the father can make him recognizable to others. Okay, let everyone know he's the bechor. So mikan amar Rabbi Yehuda. From here, Rabbi Yehuda taught ne'eman adam lomar zebni bechor. Okay. Basically, a person's believed even when there's a chazaka, even when everyone thinks that the bechor is someone else, the father's believed to say this is the bechor. Now, we talked about it yesterday that, perhaps it's the issue. There were no birth certificates. There were no, anything like that. Nobody knew who the firstborn son is. The other possibility is, and we're going to get to this in a minute in Tosfot, but perhaps it's also saying the child you think is my bechor, who actually was born first, is actually not my child. Okay, and what he's saying is, my wife slept with somebody else. Okay, so that's another possibility. That's a crazy thing because that basically means the father can turn the child into a mamzer, right? He has the power to do that, to say, oh yeah, this, we'll talk about in a minute, but the Gemara the braita now jumps to, okay, so Amar Rabbi Yehuda, you can say, this is my b'ni b'chor. Ukashem shene'eman adam lomar ze b'ni b'chor, kach ne'eman adam lomar ze ben grusha v'ze ben chalutza. In the same way, the father can say, my son is the son of I'm a Kohen, and my wife was a divorcee. Maybe you didn't know this, but maybe it wasn't known, and I did it secretly, but I divorced her and then remarried her. Okay? Now, even if there's no records of the divorce and the remarriage, he is believed to say that. Or he can say, no one knows this, but I'm telling you that my wife was a chalutza. She did chalitza before she married me, and this child is a halal. Now, Tosfot asks a big question and says, what's the connection between saying my son is a bechor to saying my son is ben grusha ben chalutza? First of all, saying my son is a bechor is good for the son, right? Saying my son is a ben grusha ben chalutza is basically disqualifying him from the kahuna. That's a very different thing. So the reason I brought up the mamzer is because the first answer in Tosfot brings a bunch of different answers, but the first answer in Tosfot is because he's ne'eman levaker, it basically means he's a ne'eman to say the son's a bechor. It basically means that he could take one of his youngest children and say, he's the bechor because all my children are actually not my children. My wife slept with someone else. And that means that he can actually turn his sons into mamzerim. If he could turn them into mamzerim, he could turn them into chalalim. Okay, now some of the commentaries say that wouldn't make your son a mamzer because we don't know who the wife slept with. You might remember. You're not a mamzer if the wife slept with a Gentile, for example, or a slave, a Canaanite slave. So it doesn't necessarily mean the kid's a mamzer, but it does mean that he's believed to say these are not my children. Okay. Sometimes it happens in divorce proceedings. It's very unfortunate because the husband will claim that the wife cheated on him. And that's why he's trying to make claims of divorce. And he's believed to say that, which then has ramifications possibly on the children, especially if they're saying she cheated with this man. It's a very complicated issue. I'm not going to get into halakhot about it, but that's Rabbi Yehuda's position. Now, and we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Chachamim omrim, okay, you can see the aleph is next to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, I didn't look at all the psikah halacha, but I assume if the aleph is there, usually that means we hold that way. And I know this comes up, this issue with the mamzerim. Anyway, it's not clear whether that's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying about the mamzerim, but that's the way Tosfot, this is the first explanation Tosfot explains. But by the way, the second one, Rabbeinu Eliyahu says, this is just also in terms of the snu'ah, who's snu'ah, why is she called snu'ah? They say she's snu'ah b'nisu'ah, which means that, he's saying there, that's where they get like, she's a divorcee. She shouldn't have married me, okay? Or I shouldn't have married her. Snu'ah doesn't mean I hate her. Snu'ah means this was a bad marriage because it was a forbidden marriage. And that's where they get the ben grusha ben chalutza. That's a different explanation. Okay. Anyway, the question is a very good question, but we're going to move on. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's position. Now we get to the rabbis. Chachamim omrim, okay, simply, eino ne'eman. No, the father's not believed. So Amalei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Rava. Now we're going to have a big question on the rabbi's position. I understand Rabbi Yehuda's position because it explains why the pasuk says Yakir and the drashav Yakirenu lachirin. But Ela l'Rabbanan Yakir lamali. What would the Yakir be coming to say? If Yakir, according to the rabbis, is coming to say that if we have a situation where the father has 10 sons and we don't know which is the oldest, the father's believed, I don't need a pasuk Yakir to tell me that. That would be obvious the father would be believed. So, right, the Gemara is going to say, well, first they're going to say, B'tzarich hakera. Perhaps it means exactly that situation. What they're going to say is Rabbi Yehuda understands Yakir as if there's 10 children, and we don't know who's the oldest, or it could be 2 children, or whatever it is. We don't know who's the oldest. The father's believed to say which one's oldest. Meaning, if there's a chazaka, we don't believe the father. If there's no chazaka and there's no presumption, right? Chazaka just means presumption, right? Well, we know to be the case. There's no presumption, then we ask the father. But lamai hilchata, what's this coming to teach you? You don't need a halacha to teach you that. You don't need a special drasha in the pasuk. Why? And this is the Rashbam puts it in the language of amigo. Okay, what's amigo? If the father wants to say this one's the firstborn, well, we don't know who's the firstborn. Of course, he's believed to say that. I don't need you a pasuk to teach you because if he wanted to lie, right, there's no point to lie. If really he wasn't the firstborn and all he wanted to do was give him the double portion, there's other ways he could do that. Okay, we're going to see that right now. Lemitva lo pishnayim. What you're saying? This is all to give him pishnayim. We don't need a pasuk for that. Lo yehei ela achir. He's just like anybody else. Meaning, ilu bai lemitva le b'matana milo yaivle. If the father wanted to stand, it's October 30th, 2024, and the father wanted on that date to say, "I'm giving you all my possessions," or "I'm giving you 2/3 of my possessions," or whatever percentage of the pishnayim is, depending on how many kids. He could just do that to anybody. Anyone could just give a gift. So if that's what he wanted to do, I don't need Yakir to teach me that. He could just stand on the date, October 30th, say, all my property is going to you. And then, just before I die, let's say, he would say. So they say, well, if the man stood on October 30th, 2024, and said that statement, I'm giving you all my property when I die, then, or the Pishnayim when I die, he could do that. But what's the problem? That would only apply to property he owned right now, because a person can't pass on something that he doesn't own yet. Let's say 3 days later, the person's father dies, the guy who said this, and he inherits all this property that wasn't in his hands on October 30th, that wouldn't go to that son. And maybe that's what Yakir is saying, that the migo would work only for what I own right now. But the Yakir teaches you that if you say today, that's my son who's the Bechor, he'll even get anything I own, that comes into the father's possession down the road. Well, the Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Meir says you can pass on something that's not in existence in this world yet. So theoretically, if the father stands on October 30th, 2024, according to Rabbi Meir, that would include even things that you could say, and anything I inherit from here on in will be yours. Well, then Yakir Lamali. So according to Rabbi Meir, then what do the rabbis need to say Yakir for? To which they answer, Ben Chasim Shenaflu Lo Kashu Boses. Well, when Rabbi Meir says I can pass on anything that isn't in existence yet, that's under the condition that at the time it comes into existence, I can also pass it on to you. What if this guy is on his deathbed, his father? It has to be a father because remember, there's no Pishnayim from the mother. Father's on his deathbed. And the whole thing, right, on October 30th, 2024, the father said, I'm giving you all my property just before I die. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, that could even include property that comes into the possession of the father down the road, but not if, let's say, the guy's father died exactly at that minute, that he was dying, Goses is like on his way out and not conscious anymore, not able to pass anything on. That property of the father's wouldn't have gone to the son. So that's why there's no migo for that case. The migo wouldn't include that case because that's a gift. You can't just give as a gift. You can't just give property that for when I'm about to die and not conscious anymore, not able to speak anymore, maybe conscious, but I can't speak and I can't pass anything on. So for that, we need the drashav yakir. Then we accept the drashav yakir. For a situation like that, that would be a case where there is no migo and there's no way to say, oh, obviously the father's believed because he could have just given him his gift. He couldn't have given that as gift. And therefore, that's what the rabbis use yakir for. It's a little bit, it's pinholing them. It's like very, very specific, but that's how you would explain it. Okay, comes the next halacha. This is just a braita that you're going to see. The first part is Rabbi Yehuda's position, and the second part is the rabbi's position, and that's what the Gemara is going to say about it. So it's just a review. Tana Rabbanana, Yumuchzakim bo shu b'chor, ba'amar aviv alacher shu b'chor. If we knew this son was a b'chor, and then the father said, no, it's not Reuven who's the b'chor, you thought it's actually Shimon. Naaman, he's believed. Okay, that's Rabbi Yehuda's position. The next line, though, in the braita seems weird because the opposite. Hayumuchzakim bo she'eno b'chor, if we knew that Shimon is definitely not the b'chor. Va'amar aviv b'chorhu, and the father said, no, Shimon is the b'chor. Eno Naaman, he's not believed. That means we don't believe the father when there's a chazaka. So the Gemara says, Reisha Rabbi Yehuda Sefer Rabbanan. Okay, it's clear that the Reisha and the Sefer here follow different positions. Otherwise, there's really no good way to explain it. Now, it's true they're a little bit different because one is wording in the positive, one is in the negative. Did we know this one was a b'chor? We knew this one wasn't a b'chor, but either which way shouldn't matter. And right, one says the fathers believed against the chazaka, which is Rabbi Yehuda, and the second line says the fathers not agreed against chazaka, which is the rabbi. And it's weird to say that a braita has one line that without specifying, but we've seen this many times. When there's no other way to explain it, that's how they explain it. I say no other way. Maybe there is a way, but okay. Now, I'm a Rabbi Yochanan. Now we're going to get on to something else. And this is in terms of the father's believability to testify about his son. Now we're going to talk about a different topic. Not is he a Bechor or not, but what other testimony about a father do we believe? And here it's a bit of a different issue you'll see immediately. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Benihu, v'chazar v'amar avdihu. Now we're talking about a person's status. Avdi means he's an Eved and an Eved Knani. Okay, remember, people had Canaanite slaves living in their house. So there's this guy living in this person's house. And now, first the father said, oh, this person is my son, meaning he's a full-fledged Jew. Or then later he said, oh, no, this person is my Eved Knani. That's a little bit weird. Which one do we accept? So Eino Ne'eman, he's not believed to say he's my slave. Okay, meaning this person can now be treated like a full-fledged Jew, right? They can marry Jewish women as opposed to an Eved Knani who can't, right? And all the laws of Eved Knani don't apply because we don't believe the father when he said he's my Eved. But Avdihu, if he started and said he's my slave, V'chazar v'amar benihu, but if it was in the reverse, and then he said, oh, no, this person's my son, Ne'eman. Why is this? Dimishamish li ka'avda ka'amar. Because what I meant is, when I said he was my slave, and then I said he was my son, what I meant is he's really my son. Why did I call him my slave? Because my slave serves me, my son serves me like my slave, okay? Maybe it was a compliment, I don't know, right? Like, what a good, dedicated son, you're like my slave. Okay, or maybe, I don't know, maybe said facetiously. Doesn't matter. The point is, those two statements can work together. Once he called him his son, is a slave. Another time he called him his son. What he really meant was, you're my son who works for me as a slave. But let's go back to the first case. Nobody would ever call their Canaanite slave their son. That just wasn't done. Okay, they don't treat their slaves as if they're son. Now, they are household members, but not like a son. So if you called him the son and then said, you're my slave, there's no way you would have, there's no way he's really a slave. Okay, and therefore we don't accept the line that he's a slave. Now, here comes the funny line. Or I don't know, funny, but maybe a little sad. It's the reverse when you're passing by the house where they take the taxes, the tax authorities. If you were passing the tax authorities, and then you said, you're walking right by the tax collectors there, you say, hey, son, to your slave. Now, why are you saying, hey, son? Because if he's your slave, they're going to take tax on him. If he's your son, they won't. So it's tax evasion. But I think it's funny, but kind of sad, right? Back then also, there was a lot of tax evasion going on. You could explain it in the sense that they have very bad relations with the Gentiles, and maybe the Gentiles were putting on unnecessary taxes, as we've seen in certain situations. Anyway, so Chazar v'amar avdihu, and then later when you're in your house, you call him your slave, Ne'eman. We believe you that he's your slave, and you just said he was your son to avoid the taxes. Amar avdihu, but if while you were passing the tax collector, you said he's your slave, v'chazar v'amar benihu. Now, in the previous case, we said, oh, maybe you just called your son your slave. But you would never call your son your slave in front of the tax authorities. They'll take taxes on that. And it's not even true. So in that case, Eino Ne'eman, for sure he's not your son. Okay, we don't believe you when you say he's your son, because there's no way you would have said slave to your son in front of the tax collectors and have to pay tax on something that wasn't really a tax. So we don't know why you're saying son now, but we don't believe you that you say son. Metive. So now we're going to bring a difficulty on Rabbi Yochanan. On the first part of Rabbi Yochanan, if someone is serving you like as if they're your son, Bava amar benihu, and then the father says he's my son, but then you said he's my slave, Eino Ne'eman, you're not believed. Okay, that makes sense. That fits with what Rabbi Yochanan said. But because again, you wouldn't call your slave your son. If he worked to you like a slave, Ubava amar avdihu, and you called him your slave, V'chazar v'amar benihu, and you said he's your son. Now, what did we say? Your son might serve you like a slave, so we'll believe you. But this braita says, Eino Ne'eman, you're not believed. So why is that? Right? That seems to contradict Rabbi Yochanan, this braita. And a more can't say something against a braita. So Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, he explains, Hatam dekarile avda mitzar mea. That's not a case where you called him slave. You called him slave mitzar mea. Okay, what is mitzar mea? The Gemara doesn't even know. My mitzar mea. Mitzar avda me'azuz. Even this is hard to understand. But what it means is you called your slave by the following term, which was a way they called their Canaanite slaves. Nobody would call their sons this at all. You might call your son my slave, but you would never call him a slave who in his boundary is 100 zuz. That means like in his vicinity, which means this slave is worth 100 zuz. People don't talk about their sons as being worth money. And therefore, if you called your slave that's worth 100 zuz, we won't believe you after that he's actually your son, because nobody calls, and again, this just goes to societal norms. Nobody calls their sons that, and therefore that's how we explain the braita to not contradict Rabbi Yochanan. So what did we do today? We started with the 5 cases of the tumtum. We got up onto a difficulty on 2 of them and really didn't resolve them so well. Then we brought a braita for Rabbi Ami. From there, we got into this issue of the ben velo tumtum and bechor velo safek. And what's this safek? And then there's about the two women who had it in secret. We saw Rava come up and admit what a mistake he made. And then it seems like everybody goes along with the braita and how we explained it. Then Shmuel was asked this halacha about Hazaka against the word of the father, right? Reuven is the Bechor, but then the father comes along and says Shimon is. And then we said it's a machlok at Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbi. Shmuel didn't know who to hold like, so he said we're going to do this harsha'ah, right? Which came up because we talked about the harsha'ah in the previous, which was what Rava had suggested that we don't hold by. From there, we got into understanding the machlok between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, and from there we got to what the rabbis do with yakir, right? And then we had to explain that it's to basically allow the father to give the son pishnayim, even though nobody knows, it's still a bit of a chiddush, right? You still have to teach us that because of these, even though there is a migo, he could just gift it to him, but it wouldn't really cover property when the fathers go seis. Or if you're not Rabbi Meir, it wouldn't cover property that's not yet in the father's hands. From there, we got into this other thing about the father being believed. What if he says son or slave? What's the difference between a regular statement of that or specifically when you're passing the tax authorities? And then we got into a difficulty on Rabbi Yochanan, which we resolved by talking about this Avda Mitzar Mea. Okay, and with that, we finish for today, and we'll pick up from the very end of this daf in tomorrow's Shiur. Wishing everyone a good day and Shema B'sorot Tovot and more peaceful, quieter days.